Thanks for joining for another episode of the TechSpective podcast. I have Yogesh with me from Druva. So if you want to give a little background on yourself and Druva for anyone who doesn't know.
Hey, Tony, thank you for having me here. Hello, everyone. My name is Yogesh Badwe. I'm the Chief Security Officer at Druva, security practitioner for the last 20 years, 15 of which mostly in the SaaS and cloud security space. Druva is a data protection provider. So we back up data wherever it resides, whether it's endpoints, data center workloads, your cloud workloads, or your SaaS apps, and we help you recover that data. We help you recover that data if there is a IT disaster, but we also help you recover that data if there is a security crisis, such as ransomware.
Okay. I've seen somewhere, I don't remember where, but I've seen the tagline of or the statement that organizations tend to protect everything but the data. Why do you think that is, and what do you think are what are the consequences of that perspective?
Absolutely. I mean, I think if you look at the last 20 years, right, I think we have gone through a transition as a security community where maybe 20 years back, we were focused a lot more on prevention. And most of the budget, most of the effort was spent in prevention. Maybe 10 years back or so, everybody realized that prevention is not an 100% solution. You can't really prevent all the bad outcomes. The surface areas are expanding. There are a lot of things that could go wrong. And so, everybody started focusing a lot more on detection and a little bit of response. And now I think, what we are realizing is, breaches are inevitable, right? So detection is prevention is hard. Detection is also a lagging indicator and difficult to 100% get right. So organizations need to be ready to respond and recover from bad scenarios. In many sense, data was not the center of prevention and detection kind of approaches for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons being that organizations just didn't have enough understanding and clarity about the type of data they had and where that data was located. And so it was much more intuitive to start to solve that problem at the network layer, try to solve that problem at the identity layer maybe, and try to approach the different vectors that go to data, which should be the centerpiece of the puzzle, right? But things have changed. So over a period of time now we are getting to a place where we have a better understanding of better tools, better technologies, and better understanding of the criticality of data. And the approaches are evolving, where security teams are focusing a lot more in terms of, okay, let's start with the data first. Let's try to get a better understanding of what kind of data we do have, where it resides, what kind of permissions are there around that data, and start to create strategies inside out more than outside in from a network or identity perspective, right? So I see a quite a notable change in terms of that shift in mindset and shift in posture, where a lot more focus is given to data, because again, I think everybody's realizing that what we are trying to prevent in majority of the cases is that data getting exposed, data getting leaked, right? It's not necessarily about the network getting breached, which of course it is, but really the end goal that we are trying to prevent in majority of the cases is around the data that we hold.
Yeah. Well, so I'm gonna pat myself on the back for being ahead of the curve, because it was at least 10, maybe 15 years ago that I had started pointing out that, like, yes, I get it. I get that the point of security is, we want to keep the bad guys out, and we don't want our computers to be breached. We don't want our networks to be breached. We don't want our mobile devices to be breached. But ultimately, all I really care about is the data. That like, if I lose my laptop, like, that's bad. I don't want to have to replace my laptop, but the physical laptop is just a thing. It's just like, I don't care about that, like, other than the expense. It's what's on the laptop that matters. And the same thing for my mobile device. It's like, I don't really care, about the phone itself. I care about what's on the phone, and making sure that unauthorized people don't get access to that data. That ultimately is the whole point of cybersecurity.
And what is funny is like if you look at all of the other product markets or tools that focus on identity, that focus on network, they can't really go through the last mile without having the data component in them, right? So if you look at if you look at a cloud security tool or an identity detection and response tool, they need to bring in the insight about data so that they are able to completely solve an end-to-end use case. Another big reason for that is too much insight, right? You have too much insight at the network layer. You have too much insight at the identity layer. How do you effectively prioritize whether it's a prevention or whether it is detection and response? Really, the insight about data helps you focus in, zoom in, narrow in on what are the right set of things that you need to be focused and solve. Also, when you think about prevention, right? We already in the security community, we already know that prevention is a very hard problem. It was already a hard problem 20 years back. Organizations are very complex. There are a lot of surface area. They are dynamic in nature, so it's not a static state. Things are always changing. But if you look at the last 5 years, the complexity has completely exponentially increased, right? So now you have very complex software supply chains, right? You have extremely complex, very large, growing third-party supply chains, your vendors that you're using, complex integration with those vendors. Now with AI agents and the growth that is happening there, your traditional paradigms around how do you authenticate, how do you authorize, all of those are changing in terms of data in the silos. And all of this is inherently making prevention even a much harder problem. Now, that doesn't mean that we should not spend time on prevention. I think it's very important to spend time in prevention and detection and response. But it's time, and teams are already starting to bring up recovery, resilience, and some of those aspects at the same par in terms of the mind share that they should receive.
Right. Well, and yeah, okay. So kind of playing off of that point, like, I've talked frequently on this podcast about the evolution of security in general, from prevention, castle and moat mindset of, well, we're in here, they're out there, we just need to guard the wall and make sure that the bad guys don't get in. That was kind of like early days of security. We went through the shift to detection and response, and at that point basically said, okay, let's just assume everyone's getting in, and let's just detect and respond better, faster. And that was like the thing for a number of years. And then I feel like in the last few years, it shifted again to more of a like yes, both of those things are true, and you still need to be resilient. Like, so prevent everything you can. I mean, like, no one's saying like, throw out your firewall or whatever. Like obviously,
yep.
There is an us and a them. So prevent everything you can, and then also be prepared to detect and respond quickly to whatever slips past. And then beyond that, have a plan for resiliency for, okay, well, how do I make sure that whatever does happen doesn't disrupt my business?
Absolutely. Whether it's a business process, whether it is your criticality of the data, I think detection is important, response is important, but your ability to recover from all of that is extremely important, because as a business, that's what business stakeholders care about, right? You want to get back to running your business. You want the business process to be operating back again at the same level. And that's not going to happen just based on prevention and detection. It's going to happen because of the response and recovery efforts that you put in. I think, we do spend enough time in terms of response, but we have spent less time in terms of understanding our ability to recover data. Now, backup is not a new phenomenon, right? We have had backups for a long time, but I don't think that historically we have put them as a crown jewel in terms of just organizational capability to recover from something, right? Do we have we use backups? We in some cases maybe you have the backups, but are your backups tested? Do you have the ability to more frequently recover that data? And more importantly, not from an IT perspective, increasingly from a security perspective, right? So traditionally, backup has been looked at as a IT disaster problem, which is a completely different ball game than thinking about, okay, I need to recover data from backups from a ransomware scenario. Because security recovery is completely different than IT recovery. You can't just recover data from a security perspective if there is a security issue. You need more capabilities. You need the ability to look at the backup and see whether there are IOCs, whether the backups are kosher. And so, I think there is a mindset difference in terms of security teams thinking about backups, backup tools, the capabilities they need from a ransomware recovery perspective, and testing those capabilities before something bad happens, right?
Yeah, well, I'm going to date myself some. I'm well aware that everything about the technologies has changed since I was working in the trenches on the network admin side. But we had what was at the time very fancy, top of the line, like robotic tape backup, that would like automatically swap out the tapes for us, and had a whole system of, keeping one set in rotation, one set locked up locally, one set off site, or all of that kind of stuff, to make sure we had the data. And yet frequently, I feel like more often than not would struggle actually restoring data. Or like it wasn't until we went to restore the data that you find out that, like, oh, it didn't really back up everything. Like we missed some stuff or whatever, or yeah, and and so that's kind of a whole different conversation in terms of when you are backing up data, making sure you have processes to both A, make sure you are actually backing up what you think you're backing up, and B, that you periodically verify that you can actually recover it, because you don't want to learn the hard way after some data catastrophe or ransomware attack, and you say, oh, we're fine because we have these data backups, and then you go to restore them and find out it doesn't work.
Absolutely. I mean, so that's operational readiness of your backup and recovery strategy, right? But also think about it this way, that you are backing up data, you are potentially also backing up ransomware. And now you come to know that there is a ransomware infection. How do you just back up data? You need the ability to go back and see whether the backups have any of those bad files. Maybe
Right.
Carve them out, and then
especially if you're backing up like continuously. It's like, okay, so like you have to be able to figure out, okay, well, at what point did my network or did this become compromised?
Absolutely. And not just ransomware. So you might want to carve out ransomware. So you don't want the snapshot that have ransomware, but maybe there are other indicators, right? Post ransomware, maybe there was a dropper, there was a remote shell that was put by an attacker. So typically incident response, you are collecting all of these pieces of data that are relevant to the investigation. You need the ability to search all of those indicators in your backups and figure out what is the right backup to recover from. But there's also complexity in terms of where do we recover it, right? If you assume a particular network or surface area is compromised, in an IT recovery scenario, you just recover it wherever it needs to go. But now from a security recovery scenario perspective, we need to figure out whether the target place where you want to recover data is good enough, right? How do we test that? And I think very, very interestingly, you start getting into more complexities from a business perspective, right? You might be continuously backing up data going back months, and you might have a ransomware infection starting 2 months back. Now, yes, you can go back 2 months and recover data that is 2 months old, but there might be business criticality to the data that you want data that is more fresher, right? And so the ability to even understand what part of the data is encrypted, what is not encrypted within a particular backup, and sort of curate your backup, right? You take snapshot from yesterday, take 4 files from the snapshot from 4 days back, and really create the best curated piece of backup snapshot and recover that is also phenomenally impactful from a business perspective, because now you're not going to the system owner or the data owner and saying that, hey, all of your data for the last 2 months is gone because the cleanest copy is 3 months old. You are really getting the best data that you can recover in that kind of security scenario.
Okay. One of the things, obviously there's been like a lot of focus in the last 5, 6, 7 years on ransomware, and ransomware definitely evolved. Like I feel like initially it was more, in my perception, initially it was more consumer focused, like out of the gate. Like it was just like, you know, your uncle would get an email and it would encrypt his computer, and they were only asking for like, you know, $300, $500, or whatever. And then, you know, it kind of grew to what we see now, where, you know, you're encrypting entire companies and, you know, asking for millions of dollars. But another part of that evolution was going from, okay, well, I'm just going to encrypt your data and demand the ransom, to I'm going to exfiltrate your data first, then I'm going to encrypt it. That way you can't just restore from backup, because I'm also going to threaten you with leaking or selling your data as well. You know, so now you got the double extortion. And one of the things I've found very interesting about that, and always kind of maintained, is like, okay, it's an effective extortion. It's actually more effective than the encryption in a lot of cases. Like, you know, it's like, all right, because yes, I can just restore from backup. Like, I don't really care that you encrypted my stuff. I can just restore from backup and go on with life. But I can't ignore when you say, okay, well, you've got my data and you're going to sell it or leak it. That's a different thing that I can't solve by restoring from backup. However, if I pay the ransom, I also have absolutely no way of knowing if you still have my data.
Absolutely.
You know, like,
absolutely.
there's no way for me to verify that you don't still have a copy, or that you haven't already sold it or whatever. And so like it gives the attackers an ability to really kind of double, triple, quadruple dip, because they can get the ransom, they can still sell your data, they can, you know, they can do all kinds of stuff. And you know, that obviously creates some challenges. And I'm not even sure there is a, you know, obviously the solution really is protect your data from getting exfiltrated in the first place, because
Absolutely.
Once it's exfiltrated, your options are kind of limited.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we have seen cases over the last maybe a year and a half, where even ransomware threat actors are not a monolithic group. They are different groups working together, sharing and handing off access, handing off information. And I don't remember the specific case, but we have seen cases where ransom is paid to one group, but they don't share the ransom with the second group, and the second group has access to the data and they leak the data, right? And so it's very hard, and the other side of the fence is extremely opaque as a victim to really understand and trust the process, right? Look, I mean, it's a blackmailing kind of business. We also frequently see backups being targeted, right? So in a kind of ransomware scenario, it's just not enough for the ransomware threat actors to encrypt the data, because they know that most companies have some sort of backup. Especially if it is on-prem, it's pretty straightforward for them to think about, okay, I'm encrypting the data, I need to put a ransomware node, but I know the company is going to have a backup environment. Let me go there and delete that backup environment. Especially if it has vulnerabilities, or if it is, you know, next door in another network segment. So we see that quite a lot. As a matter of fact, you know, what we have seen is threat actors are pretty knowledgeable about backup systems, backup products, the way to exploit those backup products, and they will do everything they can in terms of getting an upper hand in those negotiations, right? Whether it is exfiltrating data, whether it is targeting your backup and you know, making them ineffective. So really, from you need to kind of tackle all of these scenarios together in a way, from a worst case scenario perspective.
Okay. One of the other things that has come up is kind of more current, more recent, is the looming threat of quantum computing and post-quantum cryptography, and, you know, all of these things is, you know, been you know, headline concepts this year, and so there, you know, there's been a lot of talk about the harvest now, decrypt later kind of concept. You know, like all right, well, you know, basically, you might be encrypting your backup data, and that's fine today, but if a threat actor somehow obtains your encrypted backup data, they might not be able to crack it right now, but if they hang on to it until next year, they might have a tool that can crack it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I don't know how close we are from a quantum perspective to that reality, right? There are different estimates. Quantum ready computers that can crack people estimate 2030, 2040. So there are different estimates out there. Look, I think we go back to encryption, encryption architectures, and how we think about encryption architectures, right? Whenever we reach that stage where quantum computers can crack encryption, there's going to be a lot more things to figure out, and it's a real risk, right? I mean, if the data is exfiltrated, whether it was encrypted or not, you have a problem. You have a problem because first of all, the encrypted data is exfiltrated. You have a problem because the attackers are already in your network. They might leave backdoors that they can get back access, right? So really, I think one of the ways potentially to kind of think about is just your encryption architectures, how you encrypt data, what kind of keys do you use, and how do you make it more difficult. I think NIST has a timeline out there from a quantum readiness perspective that companies should start thinking about. 2025, 2026 is the right time to start kind of planning that transition to better crypto from a quantum perspective, and many companies are starting to think about that, right? Get a better sense of their products and infrastructure and what kind of encryption they have, what kind of keys they have, and how to start creating a transition plan based on the NIST timelines.
Okay. So let's kind of talk about more like operational, like actual, data visibility. So a few years back, visibility was all the rage. Everything was talking about visibility, both from from every perspective. It was, do you have visibility of all the assets on your network? Do you have visibility of all the data on your network? All valid questions. Then I remember seeing a few vendors who would come out with new tools or platforms and say, hey, we're gonna, now you've got comprehensive visibility. We're gonna help you see all the things. To which my cynical response was always kind of like, well, you're gonna help me see more things, but you can never really prove that you're seeing all the things. Like that. Yep. That's a philosophical debate. Like you can't prove it. But obviously visibility is a thing, and even I will say, even just on a personal level, I experience it. So organizations of hundreds or thousands of employees, I think I can definitely understand how big the problem can be, because I have data I have on my laptop, I've got data I've got stored on a network attached storage, I've got data on portable thumb drives, whatever. If you might send me something, and then like a week from now, I'm trying to remember. Wait, was that in an email? Was that attached to a chat? Where where was that? And so just trying to manage data from that perspective. I mean, once upon a time, both personally and in my capacity, in a kind of network admin capacity, I was operating from this perspective of trying to centralize the data. Trying to say, okay, no, I don't care where the data came from, we're going to put it all here.
Yep.
That's a quixotic goal there, because there's too much data happening all the time. It's happening all over the place, and so trying to wrangle it that way, trying to say, okay, well, we're going to put it all here, I think is a losing proposition. So you need a way to say, okay, your data is wherever your data is, but I'm going to give you visibility of that data.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think it's just centralizing data is nearly impossible in today's organizations, right? Different teams, different use cases. Data tends to go close to where the business process is, close to where the users are. And again, going back to AI. How do you think about the centrality of data, and in a new agentic kind of world where you are potentially going to have multiple agents pretending to be humans doing tasks and operating on different pieces of corporate or other types of data, right? So we need to kind of figure out a way to go to where the data resides today and try to get visibility there and protect the data there.
Yeah, and so. In your, from what you see working with customers or whatever, what are the blind spots that organizations typically deal with in terms of visibility. Like, like when an organization is struggling with visibility of their data, what is causing that?
I mean, I think not having the right set of tools, or not having the right set of coverage for those tools. As you mentioned, right, data can reside into a lot of different places. You have hybrid clouds, you have multi-cloud environments, you have developer ecosystems, and more importantly, now you have third parties that have data access, right? So you're getting that coverage and visibility across all of these surface areas is increasingly difficult, especially when it comes to third parties, right? I think the biggest challenge that we have today is getting an understanding of your data and what kind of exposure that data has, or access that data potentially third parties have to that data, and how that data is flowing. I think it's one of the biggest challenges companies face today, right? You have potentially hundreds of vendors in your corporate environment. You have thousands of integrations into your infrastructure, into your technology stack. All of those integrations and vendors are working on some sort of data. They are pulling in data, they are pushing in data. And the traditional, again, not to go back to the castle and moat paradigm, but the traditional approach of this is my boundary of my business, and all the data is inside that boundary, no longer holds true. And right, you can potentially think about, okay, within that boundary there is a coverage question, because you could be using a lot of different platforms. So do you really have the technology to talk to all of those platforms and get an insight in terms of the data? That's one part of the problem. But increasingly that boundary is very opaque and very, very fuzzy, right? So you have so many third parties, now data is going out. How do you even get a sense of what data is outside of your boundary? The boundary is not there, pretty much. Your boundary is very opaque, and you have third parties in the boundary. And I think the biggest problem probably is the third party access to the data.
Okay. So there obviously there are a lot of facets to discussing the challenges of data and securing and managing data. Once upon a time, I worked with a DLP company, and this goes back to like 2008, 9, 10. So again, things have changed a lot. But one thing that hasn't really changed, although I think AI helps automate a lot of it, is at the time we were, our solution and other solutions kind of revolved around this sort of starting point of, well, you need to go and classify your data. Like you're going to classify the data, and then our tool is going to be able to say, okay, well, that's classified. Don't let that outside of the network. And that that obviously just doesn't work because first of all, it's like who gets to choose what the classification is, and if you let the user choose the classification, then that's already a problem, because if I'm an insider threat, I can take classified information, just say it's not classified, and then exfiltrate it. Or I could just get it wrong on accident or whatever. So you can't really trust the users to do it. But even if you went through and did all of your data right now and said, okay, I'm going to classify everything, this time tomorrow, there's going to be another 10 gigabytes of data that you didn't classify. And so that's an ongoing challenge, is just trying to classify the data. And then the other thing that I think has been a challenge with data is, and this kind of is a subset of the classification, is that most data is garbage. Like I get 1,000 emails a day. I care about 10 of them. And that's just an email example, but the same thing happens with data. Like, lots of things come in. I might save them because I want to take a look at it, a little more closely when I'm working on something. But I might, then I forget to delete it when I'm done. Same thing happens actually with, I guess a really good example of it, even though it's only one kind of data, are photographs. Like my wife and I have been going through this project of trying to clean up, what we have in our phones, not because we're lacking in storage. We have all kinds of storage. I've got endless storage space. I could take another 50,000 pictures. But just from a searching and just sifting through it capacity, it's like you start looking through and you say, okay, in the month of June, I took 1,375 photos or whatever are in my iPhone. And then you go back through them and you say, okay, well, only 300 of these were actual photos that I will ever care about again. The rest of these were like screenshots or like photos I took when I was at the grocery store just so I could send a picture of something to somebody to ask a question. Like, I don't want that. I don't need to keep that. And so that's just one example, but there's a lot of data like that. There's a lot of data that you get and it gets stored and you never want to look at it again. There's zero reason why you would ever look at it again. But it seems like it's difficult to find a tool that can really help with that.
You're right. I mean, I think traditionally classification has been a problem, right? But increasingly there are tools that auto-classify data, and data is not static, right? So data is a very kind of dynamic variable there. And so tools do connect with systems and try to classify new data that comes in. Of course, there is performance and cost trade-offs in terms of continuing to classify data all the time. But you're right. The value of classification from a preventive standpoint in terms of let's make sure that data doesn't go out has reduced quite a lot, right? Where I see value still being there is again recovery and response. There is huge value in terms of understanding your data to better respond and better recover in any kind of scenario, right? Traditionally, if you look at a incident response exercise, the first thing or one of the most important things that you're trying to figure out is, all right, something bad happened. What kind of data was accessed? What is the nature of that data? And you are asking those questions, right? And traditionally, if you don't have ability to classify data across your surface, you are doing a manual exercise of trying to understand the nature of the data and classifying that data. So classification does help there. If you have classification where you can just scope a problem and say, look, this data was touched. This was the time window of that access. Now let me quickly classify that data in an automated fashion. Or if it's already classified, I have I'm saving some time in terms of understanding what is the business impact of that data. There is a little bit in terms of value from a prevention standpoint also. Of course, now you have SaaS apps, so you need to secure corporate SaaS apps. You need to look at from an identity perspective and secure your identity posture. If you do have classification integrated into that, then you are better poised to narrow down the way you want to put your preventive controls in place, right? Not just from a let's not get that data flowing out, but more in terms of what kind of permissions need to be around that data based on the sensitivity and criticality of the data, right? Without classification, you are going in and you really need to, you're pretty much doing a broad sweep in terms of your preventive posture. But if you do have the classification, then you can be more customized in terms of the kind of security controls you implement, because, right, there is a majority of the 80-20 rule probably there, where 80% of the data is not very sensitive to the organization and 20% is very sensitive, right? So if you do figure out what that 20% is, then you can curate your controls. I mean, a good example might be that if you know what is that 20%, then access to that 20% does need a YubiKey or a FIDO authenticator. But for the rest of the 80%, maybe you don't need a FIDO-based authenticator. You can look at a different sort of MFA factor because the criticality of data is not there. So a little bit of contrarian view there, but I do think there is value in understanding your data and understanding it across the surface of your organization, whatever the technology provides you.
Okay. Seems like one of the magic words this year, aside from agentic AI, is simplicity. Like I heard it come up a lot with RSA. I heard it come up a lot at the recent like AWS reinforce, and it makes sense. I mean, there's age-old adage of complexity is the enemy of security. Is that the more moving pieces you have, the harder it is to orchestrate and stay on top of. So simplicity makes sense. From the perspective of cyber resilience and data security, what are some ways that CISOs or security teams should be streamlining strategies without sacrificing control to try to achieve that simplicity?
Yeah, I think a good example is look at backup, right? Traditionally, we see backup the primary consumer of a backup system is the IT admin. But if you think about backup and expand the definition of backup, where a backup system has access to all of your data, and it can potentially help you understand the nature of that data and help you understand the changes with that data, it suddenly starts becoming very important and very valuable to incident response teams, right? So one way to achieve simplicity is for incident response teams to take up your backup system and make it an important piece of your incident response technology stacks, right? And that traditionally doesn't happen, right? In a traditional scenario, incident response teams are going to downstream data owner or system owners and requesting access during a response. And there are organizational challenges there, right? There are data silos, there are organizational silos, and you don't want to try to solve those organizational silos during an incident. So if you just go to your backup system, or if you already have access to your backup system, you already have all the access to that data to start asking very relevant questions from an incident response perspective around, hey, what kind of data is it? What kind of changes do we see over the last week on that data? What files changed? Because if you imagine backup, right, you can very easily say over a period of time how files are changing because you are backing up all of those changes as well. So I think one way of thinking about simplicity is just making backup a primary security product, making incident response teams primary users of the backup system. And that's not just conceptual in nature. It also means that backup products need to evolve and build features that are targeting and addressing incident response analyst and incident response personas, right? Another big way that we see is like the secure by default, secure by design. Too much visibility, as you say, there's a lot of complexity, and it shows up everywhere. Like if you think about third-party libraries and software composition analysis tools, a lot of companies today are trying to figure out how do you solve that problem of complexity in terms of patching, where there are so many third-party libraries your products are using. Is it better to just simplify things and move to a secure by default image, a secure by default container, and minimize the things that you need from a product perspective, so that you don't have to do a whack-a-mole in terms of the patching and the complexity required, right? So I think a lot of these kind of examples where going back to maybe the basics and rethinking the use of existing tools, existing processes in the system is super valuable to just make things simple. Like the first example I gave, incident response teams don't need to think about in their run books or from a technology perspective, how do you get access to the data? They should just go and start learning about their backup systems and how to leverage the backup systems in an incident response scenario.
Okay. So a follow-on, and like I think it's related to a lot of what you just said, but there's obviously one of the sort of shifts we've been trying to encourage for years is going from reactive to resilience. It goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning, the kind of the evolution of what we consider security. And so now there's a lot more focus on that resilience piece. What do you think are the, what's the mindset shift that security, that security leaders need to have to be able to move from reactive to resilient?
Very interesting question. I mean, I think we kind of talked about that a little bit. From our perspective, resilience starts with data, making data the centerpiece of how you look at things. Resilience starts with understanding that data, understanding your ability to recover that data. And so I think just thinking more broadly in terms of prevention, detection, response, and recovery, and making data the centerpiece of all of those processes is very important, right? And data is a cross-cutting concern across all of these things. When you think about prevention, I think we talked about classification being important to narrow down, scope down on what kind of prevention controls that you need to put in place. From a detection perspective, also data is extremely important. As an example, if you can potentially see data changes across your entire surface, if you use the right tools and get better detection from what you get from traditional tools, right? Or data trails that we talked about, right? Like from an incident response perspective, I think the value of data is very important. So making that the centerpiece, and then again, I think recovery perspective that we talked about around how do we test and how are we ready from a security recovery perspective. I think those are the important pieces. More broadly, I think resilience has to think through all of these different areas, whether it is your processes, your technologies that are in place, and how you are set up to quickly get back as a business and get your business process back up and running.
Okay. One thing that we haven't really hit on, and I think this is the longest I've gotten into a podcast in the last 2 years without touching on this more, is AI. And so I want to ask this question.
Yep.
Separating the hype and the reality, like what realistically, what does AI do for us here? Because I do see, if I go out on LinkedIn on any given day, there's a spectrum of belief in AI that goes from the people who think that it's magic and will solve every problem we've ever had, to the people who think it's purely snake oil and smoke and mirrors. It's just math, and there's nothing magic, and technically that's true. Like that, there's really no arguing that side of it. However, it can be magic. I mean, it can be math, and it is math and probabilities that can still yield magic results on some level. So when it comes to managing data, securing data, where does AI fit?
Super valuable. I mean, I think data, security of data, but more broadly from a security perspective, we are seeing a lot of different use cases, right? One of the most prominent use cases where AI is being used, whether it is related to data or not, is just your tier 1 triage from a SOC perspective, automating your runbooks, your ability to quickly generate insight from an existing piece of data, right? Using so we have a product out there called Druva Investigate that makes it very easy for your incident responders who are using your backup systems or your IT administrators to quickly talk and get insight from your data in your backup environment. And again, I think significantly reduce the time required to generate that insight from an incident response perspective, right? We are also starting to see AI being generated or AI being leveraged in secure SDLC processes. Significant use case there. If you think about the traditional secure SDLC process where your product security teams are doing design reviews, they are trying to look at what the product and engineering teams are trying to build, providing feedback. A lot of those things are starting to get improved using AI, where potentially AI agents are looking at your design documents and providing feedback directly to your designers or to your engineers, right? So across the board, I mean, I think a lot of use cases are kind of emerging in the security space. Some of them are being deployed in many cases, but we are very early, right? To see mass adoption. I think the low-hanging fruit certainly is tier 1 triage, automating and using AI for your runbooks, whether they're security runbooks or IT runbooks, are probably the most predominant use cases that we are looking at.
Okay. All right. So as we kind of wind down, I guess, so I wanted to kind of end on the looking forward question. So, as you look at where we are and the rest of 2025, maybe going into 2026, what do you see as the kind of the biggest data-centric risks that enterprises face, and what should they be doing now, or what can they do to prepare?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have to say AI a little bit, because that is top of mind for a lot of security teams. A lot of corporate use cases around AI are coming up, right? Corporate search is a good example. Many companies are going down this route of using AI from a corporate search perspective, where you are integrating data from a lot of different tools on the corporate side behind a single search interface. And that's just the start, right? 2025, 2026, and beyond, we are going to start looking at a lot of agents coming to play from a corporate perspective as well. Now, what is the challenge there? If you imagine that security teams have spent 10, 20 years starting to, thinking about the right kind of architectures, right kind of authentication paradigms, where who has access to what type of data, how should they access that data, and suddenly you have these kind of technologies come in where those paradigms are sort of breaking down. This data is starting to commingle, and it's going to be a challenge to think about how do you preserve and persist your security controls and security paradigms in from an AI perspective, and how do you translate all of that, right? AI natively does not come with that paradigm. So once you for example, once you put a search, AI-based search in front of all of your corporate systems, it's not going to read and understand downstream app permissioning model, right? And so how do you kind of think about access, authentication, and the breaking of that paradigm from a data perspective? I think is going to be super important. Agents, even though a little bit even more early in the timeline for that, but a lot of security teams are thinking about authentication from an agent perspective. Now, in a future world, you are looking at human to agent authentication. You're looking at agent to agent authentication. You're looking at agent to downstream system authentication. And in all of these cases, they are either assuming the user identity, or they are assuming the identity of another agent, carrying out action in downstream systems for the user with their permissions or their own permissions. And you can quickly see that kind of exponentially expanding in terms of complexity from all perspectives, from a preventive perspective to kind of think about, well, how do you scope this problem? How do you narrow that problem down? But even imagine an incident response scenario where you figure out something bad that happened, and you have to trace back from an audit trail perspective around, well, you had these 10 different agents talking to each other. Some of them were assuming user permissions. Some of them had their own permissions. And, where was exactly the problem in terms of these changes, and how do you kind of respond to an incident, right? So corporate data access and breaking of the authentication and authorization paradigm there, and then agents, and how do you think about agent authentication is probably the two biggest things that security teams need to think about going into next year.
Awesome. All right. Well, I want to thank you for joining me. I mean, like I said, I've been saying for a decade plus that cybersecurity really is about the data. That even actually in recent interactions, like in the last year, I've had most companies that I've talked to, even if they're not in the identity space, have said that identity is the thing. Like identity is the, that's the new perimeter. And the thing is, I agree with that. I think that's an accurate statement. But I still then come back to, okay, but why? Why are you protecting the identity? And it's because you don't want access to the data.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think all of these have their own place, and there's importance to that, right? So I think overly focusing on just identity doesn't solve the problem. So you need to kind of think about identity as well as data in combination together to have the right kind of security posture in place.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Tony. It was great to talk to you, and thank you for having me on the podcast.
I appreciate you investing your time to listen to the podcast, but I also invite you to engage on social media. Please go like our Facebook page and follow @TechSpective on Twitter and Instagram. You can feel free to let me know what you like, let me know what you don't like, let me know if you love it, let me know if it sucks, and let me know what products you'd like to see reviewed or what questions you'd like to see answered in future posts.